He held a gun to my wife's chest. Broad daylight, our porch, right there in front of the neighbors and our 10-year-old son watching from the window. No warrant, no explanation, just the fury of a man who believed he was above the law because his shirt had a badge stitched on it and we dared to say no. He called himself Officer Raymond Cole, said he was the head of neighborhood security, said he represented the HOA and the values of Lakeside Grove, but his badge was fake. His authority was fake. His smile was fake. What wasn't fake was the Glock he rested on his belt and the way he used it to threaten anyone who didn't follow his personal version of community order. All of this because we built a fence, a 6-foot iron fence we got permits for, paid fees for, measured twice, built once. My wife Eva and I, we moved to this neighborhood for peace after years of military relocations. We followed every rule, not just city code HOA regulations but Raymond Cole said it was visually aggressive, said it made us look like we had something to hide. That's all it took for this man to start a campaign of harassment. Let me paint it clearly. We were targeted. First came the notes, messages tucked under windshield wipers, suggesting we were too private for suburban life. Then came the complaints to the HOA board which, we later discovered, hadn't officially met in years. Then came the surprise inspections. First, just Raymond walking slowly past our property at dusk, hands on his hips. Then 2 men in fake uniforms asking about reported disturbances that never happened. And finally, when Eva refused to let him onto our property without a warrant, he came back armed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was control, domination. Raymond wasn't protecting anyone. He was playing sheriff in a neighborhood that had let him do it for too long. He'd bullied others, forced them to back down. But he didn't know who he was dealing with, because Eva isn't just another suburban wife. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't reach for her phone. She watched him with the calm, calculating stillness of someone who's been trained to disarm hostiles in active war zones. Raymond Cole thought he was in control, but he had no idea he was standing in front of a woman who had served in 6 conflict zones, trained NATO forces, and spent the last 10 years teaching America's most elite warriors how to stay alive under pressure. He thought he was intimidating her. He didn't realize he'd just made the worst tactical move of his life. That night, after the confrontation, she took off her jacket in our kitchen, showed me the insignia I'd seen for years, but never fully understood. She looked me in the eyes and said, "We don't run, not from men like him." And that's when I knew this wasn't about offense anymore. This was a fight for every quiet family who's ever been harassed by someone hiding behind a fake title. Raymond wasn't a real cop. He wasn't even a real HOA rep. He was a fraud with a history. And once Eva started digging, the whole rotten network came into view. A pattern of intimidation, property manipulation, and military family targeting spanning multiple neighborhoods. Across 3 states, fake documents, falsified code violations, police uniforms ordered online. And it worked until now, because this time, he picked the wrong family. And by the time we're done telling you this story, you'll understand what it means when a woman trained to protect this country is pushed too far in her own front yard. You'll understand why standing up to a fraud in uniform isn't just a personal battle. It's a stand for every family who deserves to live in peace without fear. And if you're angry now, good, you should be, because what happened to us could happen to you, to your sister, to your neighbor, to anyone who dares to live quietly without bowing to false power. This story is about what happens when power gets abused, and what it takes to fight back. Raymond Cole held a gun to my wife's chest, but by the end of this story, you'll want to see him face justice and maybe, just maybe, make sure no one like him ever gets away with it again. After the day Raymond Cole pointed a weapon at my wife, it took everything in me not to explode. But Eva didn't react with fear. She turned the lock on the front door, walked calmly back into the house, and said, "He's starting something he won't be able to finish." And that was the first time I saw the full measure of who my wife really was. 2 years earlier, we had moved into Lakeside Grove with a clear goal piece. Eva had left behind the chaos of classified operations. I'd wrapped up a 15-year engineering project and was ready to finally breathe. We picked a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees, a place where people waved at each other and cut their grass on Sundays. To the neighbors, we were just another normal couple. She told them she was a fitness consultant at a military facility. I was a civil engineer. We fit in, or at least, We thought we did. Raymond Cole was one of the first neighbors to greet us. His handshake was firm, his smile wide. He introduced himself as both a police officer and head of neighborhood security, said he took his role in the community seriously. His presence seemed reassuring at first. A police cruiser was always parked neatly in his driveway. He helped us fix a broken pipe that first week, and he often complimented Eva on her gardening skills. We even went to a couple of weekend barbecues he hosted. He presented himself as the kind of guy who kept neighborhoods safe. That impression lasted exactly for months. It started with our fence. Our backyard opened up to a public walking trail, and Eva wanted more privacy. We'd been warned about trespassers and off-leash dogs, so we decided to replace our waist-high wooden picket fence with a 6-foot wrought iron one. We got the permits. We paid the fees. We even spoke to the city planning office twice to confirm the height limit. Everything was legal, but the moment the installation began, Raymond changed. The easy smile vanished. He stopped waving. He'd stand in his yard with his arms folded, watching the contractors work, like he was evaluating a crime scene. His wife, Marlene, started walking their dog on the other side of the street. The same people who used to drop off homemade cookies stopped making eye contact. Then came the knock. Raymond showed up wearing a navy blue polo with a stitched-on badge and khaki tactical pants. He stood tall, but his voice was colder than before. "Lucas," he said, using my name like it was a command. "Would you consider dropping that fence down to 4 feet? "Why?" I asked, trying to keep it friendly. "It blocks my view of the street from my kitchen," he said plainly. I told him we'd already cleared everything with the city, that we needed the privacy. Eva took sensitive calls from military personnel, and we liked having a sense of security. Raymond nodded but forced a smile. As a representative of the HOA, he said, "I think it's important we prioritize community harmony." It was the first time he ever claimed to be part of the HOA in any official way. Days later, I found an envelope in our mailbox with a law firm's name on the letterhead. The paper was thick, with official seals and precise legal language. The letter demanded we adjust the height of our fence to meet neighborhood aesthetic standards within 30 days or face fines of $500 per day. I felt a knot in my chest. I walked out back, holding the letter. Eva was in the middle of her evening workout, nothing casual about it. Burpees, tactical lunges, sprints. Her black gear was tight and efficient, not gym trendy. A small pin sat on her collar. It looked military. I'd seen it before but never asked. She stopped mid-motion when I handed her the letter. She didn't even break a sweat. She read it once, then twice, and said, "This isn't real. We have every permit we need." I called the number listed on the document. A receptionist picked up when I described the letter. She paused. Then she said, "We didn't send anything to that address. We don't represent any HOA in Lakeside Grove." Someone had faked the document. That's not just unethical. That's a felony. That night, Eva was different. Quiet, focused. Her phone rang twice during dinner, and both times she stepped outside to answer it. When I asked if everything was all right, she said her work was getting complicated but didn't elaborate. Her voice had an edge like she was scanning 10 steps ahead, and the neighbors, they turned cold. People who used to wave at us from their porches now stared straight ahead. We found another note under the windshield one morning, written in neat cursive. "We value community cooperation in Lakeside Grove." Another one said, "It's not just about fences. It's about who belongs here." Each note had different handwriting. It wasn't one person. It was a campaign. Eva didn't say much, but she changed. She began spending long hours on calls in the backyard. Technical words floated out the open window. I didn't understand them, but they weren't about squats or push-ups. I started noticing her body language too. She moved differently, deliberately. She always sat facing doors, scanned parking lots. Every gesture was measured, controlled. How did I not see it before? And then came Saturday. We woke up to noise outside, folding chairs, a table, neighbors gathering. Raymond had set up an impromptu HOA meeting right on our sidewalk. A new sign read "Neighborhood Security Chairman." He looked proud, in control, as you can see, he told the crowd, pointing at our fence. "The Monroe family refuses to comply with community standards." Eva watched from inside, standing perfectly still behind our window. I noticed her eyes scanning the group, tracking positions, taking mental notes. She wasn't rattled. She was analyzing. This is more than aesthetics, Raymond said. It's about visibility, safety. This fence could conceal illegal or suspicious activity. Then he pulled the trigger, not literally, but rhetorically. I've conducted a full background check on Eva Monroe, he said. She works at a classified military installation. Her exact job is confidential. Gasps, nervous glances. A couple of people stepped away from the crowd. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was character assassination. And it was working. I looked at Eva. She didn't move, didn't blink, but I could see the shift in her shoulders. Raymond had stepped over a line. He didn't know it, but he'd just turned our story into a war he couldn't win. Exactly 7 days after the sidewalk spectacle, Raymond came back with backup. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 men in police uniforms stood beside him, their body language uneasy. Raymond looked confident, almost smug. We've received anonymous reports, he said, about possible weapon storage and suspicious late-night activity at your property. He placed one hand casually near his belt, on the grip of his service weapon. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat wrapped in protocol. I opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance with my body. Where's the search warrant? I asked. Raymond gave me that same forced smile. This is just a safety inspection. Nothing formal. We don't need complicated paperwork. Eva stepped up behind me. She was calm, dressed in her usual all-black training gear. But this time, her voice had a new edge. Cool, commanding. Then you're not coming in, she said. Because every law enforcement action, every single one, requires proper documentation. She turned her gaze to the other 2 officers. You both know that. They looked at each other, but said nothing. I could tell they were uncomfortable, maybe even realizing something was off. But Raymond wouldn't back down. Don't lecture me, lady. I've been protecting this community since before you ever showed up, he snapped, voice cracking slightly. His mask was slipping. Later, that evening, Eva told me the truth. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat me down on the couch. Then she took off her jacket and laid it neatly on the coffee table. On her shoulder was the golden trident I'd seen 100 times but never fully understood. She met my eyes without blinking. I'm not just a fitness consultant, she said quietly. I'm Senior Chief Petty Officer Eva Monroe. I've trained SEAL teams for the past 12 years. My stomach dropped. I knew Eva had worked with the military, but not like this. Not at this level. Not in classified special operations. She told me she'd been assigned to develop advanced tactical training at the Coronado base, a position so sensitive that even her job title was marked confidential in government records. For her safety and national security hadn't been told more, but Raymond's fake investigation had triggered something big. Military intelligence had picked up the data spike when he tried to access her background through unofficial channels. That wasn't just a privacy breach, it was a federal red flag. Someone without clearance had probed too deeply into a protected file. And that meant someone in our neighborhood had tried to dig into something they had no right to touch. So Eva started digging back, using encrypted tools and protocols most people don't even know exist. She ran her own investigation into Raymond Cole. She worked around the clock, quietly, methodically. She contacted old contacts people who spoke in code and never used names. She pulled records that weren't on public databases, and what she found turned everything on its head. Raymond Cole was not a police officer, not with the city, not with the county, not with any official law enforcement body in the state of California. His name didn't exist in the San Diego County Directory. His badge, an online replica from a site that sells Halloween costumes. His patrol car, bought at auction and modified to look official. His HOA position, made up. The board hadn't held a legal meeting in over 2 years. His real name was Randall King, and his past, a disaster. He'd worked for 3 private security companies, fired from each one for escalation of force and false incident reporting. In Arizona, he was sued for threatening a teenage boy with a stun gun over a parking space. In Nevada, he was removed from a gated community for harassing a pregnant woman about her recycling bins. He had a pattern to pretend to be in charge, assert control, make people feel afraid, then move on before anyone could hold him accountable. But this time, he stayed too long. Eva showed me the documents she'd gathered, photos, employment records, lawsuits, even a recorded phone call between Randall and another man discussing tactics for taking over HOA boards. But the most chilling detail, He'd done this before, 2 military families. He targeted them specifically. Why? Because they followed rules, didn't push back, and often kept a low profile. Easy targets. Except this time, he picked the wrong one. But before we could report him, something changed. He found out. The next morning, he was back at our door, this time with 3 real police officers, not hired actors, real badges, real authority. He flipped the script, told them we were making false accusations, claimed we had forged documents to defame a respected officer. They've created an elaborate story, he told them, to disrupt peace in the neighborhood. He was calm, convincing, professional. One of the officers looked at me and said, "You do understand that filing false reports against a law enforcement officer is a criminal offense, right?" My jaw clenched, but Eva didn't even blink. Later that evening, we heard a soft knock on the back door. It was Marley Raymond's wife. She looked shaken, holding a folder of documents in both hands. "I can't stay silent anymore," she said. "He's not who he says he is." She told us everything. About the fake uniforms, about the past communities, about how they moved from state to state, creating the same false persona. She said Randall Raymond had a need for control, that he always targeted neighborhoods with weak boards or military families who didn't speak up. "It's not just here," she whispered. "It's what he does." She handed us documents, receipts, even an old resume showing his real identity. It felt like a turning point. Finally, someone from the inside was telling the truth, but it was a trap. 3 days later, I overheard Marlene in her backyard, on a phone call she thought was private. Yet she believed everything. She said, laughing softly, "Eva even told me their plan. They're going to gather evidence this weekend." My blood ran cold. Marlene had played as she wasn't a victim. She was his partner, his cover, the perfect actress, the perfect plant. Eva shut everything down. "We go dark," she said. "We switch methods. We don't let them know we're watching." She contacted someone I'd only heard about once, Captain Joel Reyes, an old teammate of hers, now working with the FBI's Domestic Threat Task Force. She explained the situation, sent over files. Reyes responded within the hour. "You're dealing with a dangerous individual, one who's done this before, and he's not working alone." That changed everything. We weren't just dealing with one man on a power trip. We were dealing with a repeat offender, one potentially linked to a larger network. Eva installed high-grade surveillance, invisible cameras, audio recorders, motion sensors hidden in plain sight. She created a perimeter that would have impressed the Pentagon. Within 48 hours, we had our breakthrough. Randall's voice came through clearly on a captured outdoor phone call. "This neighborhood's too educated," he said. "Too many people who ask questions. I need to force out 3 or 4 more families before we control the HOA board. Once we do that, we can raise fees, run everything through our channels. The Monroes, they're just the start." He wasn't talking about community. He was talking about profit, control, real estate fraud, using fear to lower home values, force people out, then flip the properties through shell companies. It was a full-scale operation, and we had it on tape. Eva didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just said, "It's time." Depth. Operation Disclosure wasn't just Eva's idea, was her mission. She didn't move quickly. She moved precisely. Her entire strategy was built to turn the spotlight onto Randall King in a way that would expose every lie, every scheme, and every thread in the larger web he was hiding behind. This wasn't just about saving face. It was about dismantling a system of intimidation that had hurt dozens, maybe hundreds of families like ours. She began by calling for a public HOA meeting, a real one this time, not a sidewalk ambush. She sent an official-looking notice to every house in the neighborhood, stating the meeting would address fence regulations, community safety, and HOA leadership transparency. Her wording was deliberate, polite, but firm. The kind of tone that invited everyone, including Randall, and made it impossible to refuse without looking suspicious. It was bait, and he took it. Randall showed up just as she predicted, confident, crisp navy polo, replica, badge polished to a gleam. Marlene was at his side again, playing the loyal, supportive wife. They looked like they were attending a community award ceremony, not about to walk into a trap. He greeted people with a handshake, laughed easily, took a seat front and center. Eva waited until everyone had arrived. She stood at the front of the room, black blazer, laptop in hand, posture like a soldier in a briefing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already quiet. Before we address fence policies, she began, I'd like to clarify something for the sake of community trust. Officer Randall King, could you please state your badge number for the record? That single question shifted the energy. Randall paused, just long enough. That's not public information, he replied, trying to sound annoyed but calm. I'm in a specialized division. Our identities are protected. A few neighbors nodded uncertainly, still under his spell. But Eva wasn't done. She connected her laptop to the screen at the front of the room. A public website loaded the official roster of all active duty law enforcement in the county. Here is the San Diego County Officer Database, she said. It's updated in real time. Randall King does not appear here, nor does he appear on state records going back 5 years. The murmurs began. Neighbors whispered to each other. Some leaned closer to the screen. Randall's face turned red. But he tried again. There's obviously a clerical issue, he snapped. This system isn't always accurate for field officers. Then perhaps you can explain this, Eva continued. She pulled up another document, a receipt for a police uniform, badge, and vehicle decals purchased from a costume supply website and shipped to Randall's address 8 months earlier. The purchase had been tracked through a card in Marlene's name. The room fell into stunned silence. Randall stood. She's lying, he shouted. She's twisting everything. She's the real threat here. Eva Monroe trains soldiers to kill. She shouldn't be in this neighborhood. That's when he reached for the weapon on his belt. In one motion, smooth and fast, Randall drew what looked like a service pistol and aimed it directly at Eva. Chaos erupted. People screamed. Chairs clattered. Parents shielded children. But Eva didn't flinch. Not once. In 3 controlled steps, she closed the distance. Her body moved with the kind of precision that only elite training can build. In less than 4 seconds, she had him disarmed, face down, and zip-tied his weapon secured, his lies unraveling in front of the entire community. She stood over him, calm as ever. Randall King, she said in a firm voice, you are under citizen's arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it. Someone had live-streamed the entire thing. Within minutes, the video had tens of thousands of views. It hit local news by evening. By the time the real police arrived, by San Diego Detective Leah Ramos and Ava's federal contact Captain Reyes, the evidence was undeniable. They took Randall into custody. Marlene followed him out the door in handcuffs too, but right before he was loaded into the patrol car, Randall looked back at Eva. You think this ends with me? He said, his voice bitter. You were targeted long before you moved here. You and your kind aren't welcome in these neighborhoods, and they'll come again. Those words hit harder than anything he'd done before, because they weren't just venom. They were a clue. Over the next several weeks, the FBI investigation exploded. What began as a case of impersonation turned into a nationwide criminal probe. Randall Kingrail named Thomas Keller was part of a multi-state operation that systematically targeted military families and defense contractors. The goal: force them out of specific neighborhoods using harassment, false citations, and intimidation. Once families fled, shell companies would buy their homes at below market value, renovate them, and flip them for massive profit. It was a business built on fear. Over 40 military families had been driven from their homes across 6 states. The operation used phony HOA rules, legal-sounding threats, fake officers, and in some cases, even actors dressed as child protection agents or inspectors. Some were pushed into panic selling. Others just moved to avoid confrontation. The financial damage was estimated at $15 million. The emotional damage, impossible to measure. The network used detailed databases, private security firms with access to government records. They filtered for keywords: security clearance, military contractor, naval warfare command. That's how they chose their targets. Not randomly but deliberately. Ava's case cracked everything open. She testified in multiple federal hearings. Her evidence helped indict 23 individuals across 6 states, and more importantly, it sparked a movement. The Department of Homeland Security launched a new task force focused on domestic fraud against military families. Congress passed emergency legislation nicknamed the Monroe Act to increase penalties for impersonating federal officers and to create a national verification system for law enforcement credentials. The legislation passed with overwhelming, bipartisan support at the community level. Lakeside Grove was never the same. In the best way. Neighbors who once stayed silent, now organized. They created an HOA oversight board with rotating leadership, financial transparency, and a strict no-uniform policy for non-officers. Neighborhood watch groups trained not in suspicion, but in awareness. Community meetings shifted from performative gestures to actual conversations. And Eva, she never claimed power, but she was the one everyone looked to when things needed to be done right. Still, none of this erased the fact that we had lived under a lie, that we'd been manipulated, that our neighbors had turned away from us out of fear, that our son had to watch a man threaten his mother with a gun. But Eva never focused on revenge, she focused on prevention. 6 months after Randall King Real, named Thomas Keller, was taken into custody, Lakeside Grove didn't just look different, it felt different. The shadows that once clung to every mailbox, every hushed sidewalk conversation, every HOA letterhead ... were gone. What replaced them wasn't just safety, it was clarity, a kind of shared awareness, the kind that only comes after a community realizes it had been sleepwalking under the spell of fake authority. The very next HOA meeting looked nothing like the one before. It wasn't held on a sidewalk under intimidation. It was held in the community center, with an actual sign-in sheet, publicly posted agenda, an open floor discussion. The turnout was huge, not because people were afraid this time, but because they were finally ready to speak. Thomas Chen, a retired attorney who had lived quietly at the far end of the street, stood up first. "We need structure," he said, "not power. We need rotating leadership, financial transparency, and most of all, what happened here should never happen again." The crowd agreed. It wasn't just about punishing a criminal. It was about making sure no one else ever could fill that vacuum again. The new bylaws were proposed and passed within an hour. A 5-member oversight board, public records of all votes and fines, an external ombudsman to review complaints, all HOA documents made digitally accessible to residents. Simple things, but powerful when they're not buried in manipulation. Then Margaret Willis, 73 years old and formerly one of Randall's quietest supporters, stood up next. Her voice was steady, proud. "I nominate Eva Monroe as HOA president. She saw the truth when we didn't. She protected us." The room erupted in applause. Eva smiled but shook her head gently. "Thank you, Margaret. But I didn't do this alone. I'd be honored to serve on the oversight board, though alongside others." That was her style. Never above anyone, always walking beside them. She used her new position not to command, but to educate. She started teaching monthly workshops on situational awareness and legal rights for homeowners. She showed people how to vet authority, how to read legal documents, and how to identify intimidation tactics. She even began working with local law enforcement to build trust in legitimate officers, because she knew fear and skepticism, once planted, don't die easily. Word spread fast, not just in Lakeside Grove, but across the county, then the state. Other communities began reaching out, asking for advice. Eva never turned them down. She worked with homeowners associations, veterans groups, and even schools to teach one thing: real leadership empowers. It doesn't control, and power means nothing without accountability. Captain Reyes and the FBI kept in close contact. They sent Eva a letter of commendation for her service to national security and citizen protection. Naval Special Warfare Command followed up with their own recognition. "Your actions have safeguarded not just your neighborhood," it read, "but the integrity of those who serve in silence across this country." But the most meaningful impact came locally. The HOA's entire budget, what had once been a tool for punishment, was now being used for renewal. The neighborhood park was rebuilt using recovered assets from the fraud ring. Surveillance equipment and security systems were updated with full transparency. And for the first time, children could ride bikes in the cul-de-sacs without parents looking over their shoulders every 5 seconds. Unity Day was created, a new tradition, a celebration of the turning point. Families brought food, shared stories, held games and workshops. Eva led a seminar on community protection. The local sheriff's department sent representatives. There was no tension, no suspicion, just cooperation. The event was featured on 3 local news stations. One headline read, "From Fear to Fortitude, How One Community Reclaimed Its Power." Another called Eva, a modern guardian of justice. She took none of the credit. When asked during an interview what she hoped other neighborhoods would learn from Lakeside Grove, she answered plainly, "Don't surrender to silence. Ask questions, verify authority. And if you ever feel like someone is trying to isolate you with fear, don't wait, speak up. Because silence doesn't keep you safe, it keeps the abuser hidden." It wasn't just words. Eva lived that truth, and people responded. Teenagers began showing up to her weekend classes. One of them asked if she could teach them the move she used on the fake cop. She laughed and said, "What you really need to learn is how to spot danger before it happens." Then she taught them how to read behavior, how to stand tall, how to ask direct questions. The story of Thomas Keller and the HOA impersonation ring continued to ripple outward. The Department of Justice released a full report citing the case as one of the largest known schemes targeting military families in residential communities. Keller was charged with 7 federal crimes: impersonation of a law enforcement officer, conspiracy to commit fraud, interstate harassment, wire fraud, and more. He was sentenced to over 20 years. Marlene received 8 for aiding and abetting. Perhaps the most chilling part wasn't the crimes, it was the last thing Keller said during his sentencing. "You stopped me, but you didn't stop them all." That statement sparked a new investigation, and sure enough, the FBI traced financial records to at least 3 other cells operating similar schemes, copycat versions, built off Keller's blueprint. They were in Ohio, in Virginia, even in the outskirts of Texas. But this time, people were ready. Ava's protocols became part of a national pilot program, rolled out by Homeland Security in partnership with the Department of Defense. Called Community Shield, the program now helps verify officer identities, educates HOAs on federal impersonation laws, and supports whistleblowers in closed neighborhood systems. What began with offense led to federal reform. Back at home, Eva remained unchanged, focused, steady, still the woman who knew when to speak and when to let silence make her point. We often sat on our front porch in the evenings, watching our son ride his bike, watching the neighborhood move like it was meant to move, families free to live, people free to trust again, and that 6-foot iron fence, still standing, not as a wall between neighbors but as a monument, a marker of what happens when one woman says, "You've gone too far." A line no fake badge could ever cross again. Some stories end with justice. Ours began with it, then asked what we would do next. But when Thomas Keller was convicted, the neighborhood clapped. News anchors called it a stunning victory for truth. The Department of Justice named Eva Monroe a key contributor to one of the largest domestic impersonation crackdowns in recent history, and to be clear, she deserved every bit of the recognition. But when I asked her that night, as we stood under the porch light watching our neighbors walk safely home, if it all felt worth it, she just stared at the ground for a long moment. Before answering, "Justice," she said, "isn't a finish line. It's something you carry." Because even after Keller's sentencing, even after the applause and policy changes in national press, the damage lingered. People had been scared into silence. Families had almost lost their homes. Some moved away before they knew it wasn't real. Children had watched armed men threaten their parents. And all of that doesn't go away just because a criminal wears handcuffs. But what you do after the rebuilding, that's what defines a community. Eva didn't disappear after the headlines faded. She didn't go back to just training elite soldiers in secret. She stayed rooted in Lakeside Grove. Every Saturday, she opened our garage for free self-defense and situational awareness training. No sign-up, no fees, just come as you are. Teenagers showed up first, then mothers, then veterans. Within 2 months, the workshops became standing room only. At the same time, she worked with school boards to develop a basic verification toolkit for parents: what to ask when someone says they're an officer, what paperwork they must show, and how to report impersonation attempts without fear of retaliation. It spread faster than anyone expected. Within a year, 30 other neighborhoods adopted Lakeside Grove's new HOA model: rotating boards, financial transparency, and third-party audit access. All inspired by a woman who'd been forced to defend her home with the same poise she once used to lead soldiers through live fire scenarios. And then came the plaque, the playground built from recovered fraud assets, bright slides, clean benches, the laughter of children echoing where fear once lived was officially renamed Monroe Park. At its entrance stood a small bronze sign, "For those who stand when others stay silent, for those who protect not with fear, but with truth." Eva didn't want a ceremony. She didn't even attend the dedication, but she walked past it often, usually after class, always with a quiet look on her face. Not pride, not nostalgia, something heavier, like she was carrying the names of every family that hadn't had someone like her at their side. And maybe she was. One night, months later, we sat on our back porch, watching the street wind down after Unity Day. Families had gathered, food had been shared, stories told, the kind of day where a neighborhood becomes more than a cluster of houses, becomes memory. "Do you regret it?" I asked her, revealing everything. Stepping out like that, Eva looked out toward the fence, the one that started it all. Her face was calm. "There are times," she said slowly, "when secrets protect people. But there are other times when the truth is the only way to keep them safe." That was Eva. Her strength wasn't in what she could do. It was in when she chose to do it. And why? And for the first time since this all began, I understood. Justice isn't about catching a bad guy. It's about making sure the next one doesn't get a chance. It's about neighbors looking out for each other, about knowing your rights, about refusing to be ruled by intimidation just because someone wears a uniform or says they do. What we faced wasn't just a man pretending to be a cop. It was a system of silence, and we broke it because one woman, my wife, stood up and said, "No more." And every time a child laughs on that playground, every time a neighbor knocks without fear, every time someone asks a hard question instead of staying quiet, justice is reborn again, not as a headline, but as a habit,